we'll get started. Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm speaking on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to them and to the traditional custodians of other lands where all of our participants this morning are based. I acknowledge the elders who are caring for those lands, and I pay my respects to the old ones who have come before and the young ones who will follow. And I also extend that respect to any Indigenous people with us today. My name is Jazz Chambers and I'm the chair of the New South Wales Inspiring Australia and National Science Week Executive Committee. And thank you all for making the time to join us at this briefing that we decided to move to Zoom due to the inclement weather and an overwhelming preference from the 90 odd people who have registered to attend today. So thank you for being here quite early. A fantastic benefit of coming to you virtually this morning is that we are today welcoming people outside of Sydney as well, including from Dungog, I've just heard, where it is the waters are subsiding, but it's pretty wet out there. While we look forward to resuming our live networking events at some stage in the near future, it's great to have so much interest in today's topic. If this is your first time attending an Inspiring Australia event, welcome. Thank you for being here. There are all kinds of organisations represented here this morning: science research agencies, universities, museums, libraries, government, business and community groups. What unites us all is our passion for connecting science and technology to the broader public. We regularly host stakeholder get-togethers to share ideas and hear from policy leaders about upcoming opportunities. We also use them to build relationships across New South Wales. So I hope you'll find today's discussion about the impact of STEM engagement programs useful. As we move through today's agenda, you're welcome to use the Q&A function to ask questions or make comments. We'll do our best to include them when we get to question time in about 50 minutes. So today's topic, one very close to any science communicator's heart, is measuring our impact. Inspiring Australia was established around 12 years ago as a national public engagement strategy to strengthen the relationships between science and society and to unite all of us in that mission. The national framework that was created was done in close consultation with the science community, who agreed we need to reach out more widely and work more strategically to change the way people think about science and understand its relevance to their lives. By getting organisations with an interest in STEM to work together in a strategic way, and by partnering with diverse communities in program delivery, the expectation was that we would be able to engage an increasingly broad audience with science, technology and innovation. So the question is, have we achieved this? Measuring how effective we are in supporting hundreds of community partners to deliver quality public engagement to a broad public audience is important. But given limited resources and reporting requirements, that focuses us very much on numbers of engagements. So are we failing to capture some of the more nuanced long-term impacts of the Inspiring Australia initiative? We are thrilled that two economists have agreed to join us today to look at ways we can begin to capture some of the social outcomes of the work we do in partnership with hundreds of partners. In a moment, you'll hear from Jeremy Thorpe, PwC's Chief Economist, and Jackie Allende from Deloitte's Sustainability and Climate Change team. They will lead a conversation about techniques for capturing the social capital value of STEM engagement and consider how we might apply this lens to programs supported by Inspiring Australia. After that, we have three regional science hub representatives who will share their experiences of how Inspiring Australia's programs have impacted their communities, and then we'll open up for a discussion. So please gather your thoughts about your own observations about the social impact value of STEM engagement and join in the conversation. Before we hear from our economist friends, I'd like to welcome our Inspiring Australia New South Wales Manager, Jackie Randalls, who will briefly set the scene about how we currently monitor the programs that we support. Over to you, Jackie. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jazz, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. So I've just completed our reporting for last year, and I thought I'd share with you our killer numbers. Our 2020 results were extraordinary, as always. We had about 409 partners working together to deliver 440 events, and there were over 700 scientists and science communicators involved. Now, in the COVID year, most of these events were online, and we managed to reach around 685,000 audience members with the online programs. And a lot of this engagement continues as people are able to continue to access the content. Now, for this, our investment was $182,000, and we estimate the leveraged value to be at least $519,000, and that excludes volunteer labour. Now, anyone who works with volunteer programs knows that estimating the true value of volunteers is really difficult. Volunteers themselves don't accurately count their time. They often underestimate the value of their labour, but then they come with skills and experience, and that, you know, if you were paying for those hours, what would that be? And there's a huge range of skills and experience. And they also come with networks, and networks are extremely valuable as well. So these numbers are incredible, and they're delivered year on year, but they don't demonstrate the long-term value of IA's work in New South Wales. The numbers, for me, just don't convey the incredible long-term impact of Inspiring Australia. Now, for the actual funding bodies, right now our measurement is really limited to a lot of counting. We count numbers of events, numbers of audiences, numbers of new audiences, numbers of hard to reach audiences, and of course, all the different scientists involved and the diverse disciplines they represent. I like to go a bit deeper, so I try and estimate the in-kind value. And I also track the quality of science engagement by asking anyone who receives money from us to survey their audiences and also their participating scientists. How did they find the experience? What did they learn? Last year, I worked with University of Sydney to try and come up with a national evaluation framework for National Science Week. And the researchers are still looking at that data now. But as a grants manager, there's a limit to what I can do as one staff member to monitor all of this work. And the metric I'd really like to capture is what's the long-term impact of the network effect. In our state, these networks are truly valuable. So how can we talk about them in a way that's going to really resonate with our funding bodies and also with other parties who might want to join us in our efforts to transform the way we experience science in our community? Most of the work I do involves fostering networks, and it's those trusted networks that are really the true value of Inspiring Australia. So what's the dollar value of that? How can you put a quantitative amount on the value of trusted networks and the network effect? So that's why I'm very excited. We have two economists joining us here today who are experts in doing just that. So our first guest speaker is Jeremy Thorpe, who we've known in Inspiring Australia for many years. He's PwC's chief economist, as Jazz said, and he has a huge amount of experience in valuing the economic contributions of a diverse range of activities. It's wonderful Jeremy's joining us today, and please think of questions and comments as he's speaking and pop them in the chat and we'll come to them later. So Jeremy, now we've got you online with your video, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I feel slightly scared that I might be telling you things that you already know, but let me fire away. And maybe let me just start with, you are not alone as a collective or as a group of people trying to demonstrate your value. This is something, strangely, that even governments are doing and that the private sector is doing, and obviously not-for-profits and community groups have traditionally been asking these questions. And that's because everyone is trying to prove their relevance, and relevance is ultimately determined in the eyes of many decision makers by either a dollar figure or some other metric that does go to that long-term value. So what I want to do, because I'm a consultant, is walk you through a whole lot of slides, and I'm a very quick slide mover, so hopefully this will go very quickly, and really give you a sense of, one, a process, but two, just as important when we come out of this is not just what we're measuring, but also how we're communicating it, because often even the best research falls down at that endpoint. So let me walk you through where I think we're looking at. So I want to walk through four bits. First one is around defining value, and again, we tend to often just skirt over this a little bit, but we need to actually step back and say, well, what are we trying to actually talk about when we talk about defining value? It can be as much as the value in a dollar sense. It might be because you are generating savings for other people. The return on investment's often a phrase. It might even just be about not your contribution, but the size of the challenge that you're addressing, often an issue in a medical space. It might be a more formal cost-benefit analysis of the type that treasuries want. It might just be building awareness. There's a whole range of elements that people might think about from a value sense. And in some senses, this is a journey that many organisations go on. They start with thinking around defining value in one of these contexts and move over time. But it's important that you actually make a conscious choice about, when we're talking about value, how do we want to think about it? The other kind of conscious choice that you need to think about is, who are we actually trying to talk to here? Because value is in the eye of the beholder often. And so understanding who the audience is that you are trying to speak to. Now, invariably people say, well, of course, every one of those is who we're trying to speak to. But as with many things, if you try to be all things to all people, it's often you're nothing to everyone. And so actually being quite conscious around who the audience is, because they will be receptive to different conceptions of value. And again, this may be a journey that people go on, that you start with one or two of these categories, but over time you do actually branch out. But too often organisations, when they start on this journey, miss these two steps and just go headlong into, we need a number. So once you've got an idea of what it is you're trying to actually assess, you need to have some kind of framework that you put that discussion in. Every consultant's got a framework. There's a gazillion out there in this space. There's social capital, there's a social return on investment, there's a program logic, there's a whole lot of different frames that you might start to put this in. But ultimately, you've got to have some theory of change that sits behind all of this, that you are doing something that is generating a change in the current state or the future state. It must impact on someone or some organisation or some process or some structure, and from that beneficiaries come. No matter what framework that you have, this kind of must sit underneath it. At the end of the day, I'd suggest the framework needs to be specific to you, and you need to have a view as to what your common language is going to be, because you can just go Google a framework about evaluation, but it won't necessarily resonate with the people that you are dealing with, both from who you're trying to communicate with, but also the people in your cohort that are part of this journey with you. And it might sound trivial, but language is often important, and it does engender a buy-in that people understand that you're talking to them or about them, and that you are talking in the same process of change. Again, simple, relatively trivial, but in fact, if you get it wrong or you don't embrace and think about this constructively, it does limit what you're doing. At the end of the day, I would argue that some form of program logic underpins most of the things that we're talking about in this space. And why? Because it actually is a very flexible framework for thinking about how you are impacting different elements of the community. And the language here is, as you can see here, there's a situation, there's a need, you have objectives that you're trying to address that need, you have a series of inputs, people, money, time, a whole lot of things. You do things with those inputs. It generates the outputs, and Jackie's flagged some really interesting outputs out of the process that she went through last year. Where the challenge is, and what Jackie's flagging is, its outcomes and long-term impacts that ultimately are the real challenge that we have here. And until you have outcomes, it's hard to have a view as to the effectiveness. And until you have a longer-term view of those outcomes, it's hard to have a really solid view as to sustainability. And so that's the journey that we are going on. And so what I want to talk you through briefly is some of the challenges that we see and some of the maybe learnings in that, making those judgments. Because the challenge is often quantifying what we're actually doing. The first thing that often gets overlooked is the base case. What's actually happening now? Again, we like to rush headlong into doing things, and then at some point later in the process, we say, oh, we should actually evaluate what we've been doing. But unless you've got a conception of what the status quo was and what the status quo would have been in the absence of what you've done as well. So the world keeps moving, it keeps changing. just because it was a certain way 2 years ago doesn't mean that if you hadn't have done whatever you're doing, that it would exactly be the same. Technology, COVID, changing consumer behaviours, there's a whole range of elements there that we need to have some view of, and it's a much easier process to have that view before you start your actual intervention, that your programs, your investment, whatever the thing that you're trying to evaluate is. Again, easily overlooked, hard to correct. I think the biggest challenge I see in this space is the time horizon. You're talking about working with often children or people, and it may not be years later till we actually see that element come out, that the change that you have engendered actually may come through. We see that this is a real challenge in programs that are about engaging with young people, and obviously in the STEM environment, encouraging them to love and have a passion for STEM. That may be a lifelong journey for some people, and actually understanding that you've shaped that longer term view is a real challenge in this space. And I'll come back to some of the challenges and how economists might think about it in a moment. And maybe this is the point. I'm an economist, and I look at two anecdotes and think that is almost a fact, and that is probably anathema to every scientist out there. And we did a recent evaluation of an ARC-funded research institute out of Melbourne, and it was a clash of cultures. It was the economists saying we need to have a lot of assumptions in our evaluation, but they can be plausible assumptions, and the best assumptions are a step forward than having no assumptions at all. We struggled with the scientists here. I have the same issue in my firm, full of auditors and accountants. Unless it's double entry bookkeeping, it all sums up. That's a fact. And the economist says, well, I think we can look at last time what happened. We can make some reasonable and plausible assumptions. This to me is one of the areas where people need to possibly step out of their comfort zone. When you're asking people to think over the horizon, you are necessarily asking people to make some assumptions about how your interaction today is going to shape future behaviours. There is insights that can be gained, but people need to step away from that comfort of facts. So I hope I'm not being too rude in saying any of that to the scientific community here, but we see it time and again. And the next one that's a challenge is the causality issue, and it goes back to that assumptions point. Just because a change is observable or does not necessarily mean you're scientists. This is possibly home turf for you guys. Just because we see a change doesn't necessarily mean that we see causality, that your activity or your non-activity has caused that outcome or non-outcome as well. There may be a number of factors there. And so we need to think about that. And there's always a risk effectively of overly counting, but equally thinking causality, there's effect of potentially undercounting if there are other causal factors that are shaping outcomes in your evaluation. Again, thinking of some of the work we've done with scientific organisations, one of the challenges often is that there is a lot of research done in evaluation. I would argue, almost too much. There's an 80-20 rule that you probably get to a reasonable point in the process reasonably quickly, but how you communicate it becomes quite a challenge. I'm going to tell you something that consultants probably don't want to admit, but you need to own the analysis. Too often when people get consultants in, it's the consultant's brand that the organisations or the people being evaluated rely on. But in fact, if you're going to talk to decision makers, this needs to come from you. Even if you get a third party doing an evaluation, you need to own it. And when you're talking to people about your performance, it's a much better view if it's coming from a self-evaluation perspective rather than a third party. In the same way, less is more. What we do find, and again, work we've done with evaluating scientific organisations is the natural tendency is 1,000 footnotes and 100 pages, and that's the thud factor when the report hits the table. What we time and time again see is decision makers really want, and almost as the way Jackie introduced her key findings, they want those 3 headlines. They want the summary, and telling the narrative becomes more important necessarily than how we got there. Easily overlooked, but in fact, this is where the money flows from your interactions with your evaluation rather than the evaluation itself. And that's what I'm also in the context here. I remember a lobbyist saying to me, unless it's got $1 billion, no one in Canberra cares. But what we've found is that big numbers actually can obscure the message. And we see that time and time again, that we've become desensitized to enormous numbers. And actually, smaller is often more personal and tangible. That vignette of a story or the vignette of a number, bringing it down to a personal number or a personal metric becomes often a more powerful exercise than thousands of jobs and millions of people. And that's because stories do matter. Those personal stories are often the things that when politicians stand up in Parliament, they're telling the story about Mary or Sam who's had an experience rather than a series of statistics. And so you need both of those. Again, those stories, and your challenge is many of those stories evolve over time. They're not necessarily available at that final point, but it's finding that story of someone that had an epiphany on the road to Damascus, and that can talk about that their life was changed because of X, Y, and Z. And that's coming back to tailoring your message. We've seen time and again when they're doing evaluations around these programs, sometimes it's a state answer that's important. Sometimes it's a national answer. Sometimes it's an electorate answer. Sometimes it's about an impact on males versus females. Tailoring your message, one evaluation doesn't necessarily mean one communication that comes out of it. We do see that being an absolutely consistent challenge, but there's a lot of benefits from thinking about that messaging as well. So Jackie, that's where I got up to today. I'm happy to take questions now or later in the process, whatever works best from your perspective.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. There's a lot of information in there and I've got a million questions to ask, but I think we'll hold questions for when we've had all our speakers, because there's obviously going to be another perspective from Deloitte. And thank you very much, Jeremy. So let's turn now to Jackie Allende, who's our second economist guest. Jackie helps businesses articulate and increase the social impact that they create. So she's well qualified as well to suggest how we could do the same. And I've asked Jackie to give us some practical examples of how we might do that in the Inspiring Australia context. Jackie, over to you.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Jackie, and hi to everyone. Just quickly, just to disabuse you of one notion and to make sure we're on the facts here. I actually am not an economist. I work in sustainability and have done for more than 10 years now. My background originally was communications, so your role is very dear to my heart, and I heartily endorse some of the things that Jeremy was saying earlier about the need to tailor your message and that stories really do matter. I wanted to talk, I guess, in a little bit more detail. I wasn't sure the degree to which Jeremy would be moving into some of this area. So apologies if some of the things that we're saying cross over. We may have a slightly different perspective, but I think we're pretty much in harmony and about the way that we see the importance of being able to articulate your impact and the way that you need to think very clearly about the sort of value that that you create. So I'm just going to share screen now, and hopefully that is working for everyone. Hopefully that's working. It was great. It's great to see that Jeremy started off talking about value and trying to articulate different types of value. I just wanted to put a little bit of a different spin on it to talk about alternative perspectives of value. So the way that you might want to think about the value that you create in order to start conceptualizing the way in which your programs start adding value to the community. So through your the networks that Jackie mentioned earlier, the broad networks and the relationships that you're building, the value that you get from human capital, potentially the jobs that you might be creating down the line as your long-term outcomes, the intellectual capital that you might stimulate through people having a broader understanding of science and therefore starting to be more open to innovation. Natural capital may not be something that's high on your list of value that you create, but it might be something that you could consider further down. Manufactured capital, the value that is derived from assets, and financial capital. It's the way that we traditionally think of value. And Jeremy mentioned that everyone is now starting to think about impacts and the way that they are creating or destroying value. And we're starting to see that through the way in which investors are considering the types of investments that they want to make. So we've seen more and more businesses wanting to understand their impacts because they want to understand the net value that they create, not only for their companies, but for the environment and for the society as well. So when you understand more clearly and are able to articulate the value that you create, you're better able to see the opportunities, you're better able to leverage that value, and you're better able to manage any risks that might impede your ability to create value. So I just want to put up there those different perspectives on creating value, because they can help you think about and articulate the way in which your programs are creating value. I think the other thing I wanted to look and provide you with a little bit more detail. I know that Jeremy and I, our presentations are probably cross over here quite considerably, but just to give you a little bit more practical examples of the way in which you might start out to think about about how you create value. So what does your program aim to achieve? And what do you use to create value? The inputs that Jeremy mentioned, describing your initiative or program, the resources or inputs uses. Jackie, you mentioned the incredible work that volunteers do. So that's a clear input. There's dollar grants. There's that network of local supporters who might, generate buzz around particular events. There may be donations from local businesses. There may be a whole plethora of inputs to your programs. As Jeremy mentioned, thinking about who's benefiting from that program, who are your activities for, and that will help you to start to think about the way in which you might be creating value for those particular types of people. So there may be different types of value that you're creating and different outcomes or outputs that address different segments of your audience. What's the immediate output of the program? And we've talked about that. And you've clearly got a very strong handle on that from the statistics you presented this morning. So the number of events, the number of scientists who are engaged, the number of audience members, and clearly it's then that challenge of thinking about what are the longer term outcomes that you're delivering here. And I know it's a real struggle for a lot of organisations to start to understand and to think about what their outcomes might be. And there are, as Jeremy mentioned, a lot of challenges. It's often difficult to separate outcomes from outputs or activities, especially when those outcomes can be quite intangible and long term. So I just thought I'd give you a little bit of an example of how that might look. And this is this is from a study that Deloitte Access Economics did about the social impact of Gippsland's neighbourhood houses just a little while ago. And I chose this example not because it's related to scientific program evaluation, but because it really taps into that grassroots community-based material that your programs deal with all the time. So this was a study that looked at the dollar value, tried to put a dollar value on the neighbourhood houses in Gippsland. I don't know if many of you know about neighbourhood houses, but they're community centres that connect members of the community through social, educational and recreational activities. And the things that they do are sort of various services. They put on community lunches, they promote physical activity like sports or yoga or things like that, provide access to information about available services, and they're really aimed at benefiting people who are experiencing social isolation or disadvantage. So just to point out that these headings, the headings here at the top, health and well-being, connected and reduced social isolation, safety, resilience and pride, independence and productivity. Those are what the study found to be the long-term impacts created by the program. And in those boxes here, you can see some of the inputs and outputs that were attributed to those particular areas of impact. So, you know, number of participants, healthcare cost avoided, number of volunteers, a number of sessions. So there's a range of different measures here that help to demonstrate value. This study did go on to assess an overall value. So in 2019-20, $1 invested into the neighbourhood houses of Gippsland resulted in $2.78 in economic and social benefits. Yeah. And then just a little bit more to delve into greater detail here, just because I think that's seeing the detail and how we span it out is quite helpful. So what we're doing here is trying to work out a process to look at your theory of change, Jeremy, or program logic. Jeremy mentioned that earlier. So it's about looking at the precise inputs, the activities that you might be performing, the outputs, and then thinking about things in terms of short-term outcomes, medium-term, and longer terms. And as you can see up here, it's been categorized into the different audiences that the program has. So individuals, the family, the broader system, and the broader community. So the importance of articulating this is that it then helps you to make some decisions about the sort of metrics that you might need to collect. So if your program is contributing to those goals of building an awareness and appreciation of science, celebrating the excitement of science and scientific discovery, enhancing the focus on capability and skills, and improving science communication skills. What are the metrics? What are the things that you might start considering in these, in terms of those short-term outcomes, medium-term and long-term, and how can you demonstrate that? Yeah, so I really didn't want to dwell too much on that, but in terms of, I totally agree with Jeremy that there are a range of things that you need to consider here, and that you may have to deviate from the scientific norm of absolutely having facts to back up everything. I quite agree that you're going to need to have some assumptions. So you need to, in order to think about these types of outcomes or impacts that you have, you're going to have to think about how does your program create that change? So, and there are a range of things I think you need to bear in mind. So one is you won't have all the answers at once. You may even need to line up, and I'll just go back to that earlier slide. You may, in order to think about your measurement, you're going to need to engage with stakeholders to help you identify outcomes. You will start off with by developing a hypothesis about how you do contribute to change. You already do, as I understand, as part of your evaluations, you do engage with stakeholders to identify outcomes. That helps you to develop your hypothesis about how you're creating change. The outcomes that you identify are going to be the things that help you to select the best metrics for measuring that your contribution to that change. I think you have to be comfortable with a bit of uncertainty because not everything will be able to be quantified. It's definitely okay, in fact, rather expected, that you're going to have to make assumptions. And particularly, you might need to make some assumptions about the proportion of change that you have contributed to. So even if you can do some outside research to understand that, say that more people are engaged in STEM in particular areas than was the case 3 years ago. Even if you get that sort of outcome, you're going to have to make some educated guesses and some assumptions about the percentage or proportion of that change that your program contributed to. And then you do need to reference broader research to help quantify your outcomes. So you'll have, for your evaluation, you'll have stakeholder engagement, but you may need to search out some other research to enable you to quantify your outcomes. So if we look back here, all of these some of these these outcomes increase well-being through volunteering. You might want to do a follow-up survey of your volunteers in future years to understand, how they've, what they've got, what benefits they've got from volunteering. Increased, and that might be increased self-confidence. You might find that developing local networks through engaging with your programs has in fact, reduced social isolation and loneliness. So thinking about how you might measure some of these broader outcomes is going to be a challenge. But the first step is to start developing an idea about how you create change. And really, I think, Jeremy, you covered most of this so well. I won't go on here. I think we are doing okay here. I'm just trying to stop my share. So there we are. And thanks, Jackie. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And again, whilst there was crossover, there was a lot of additional information in there too, particularly referencing other studies that have been done. But I think for all of us, our objectives overall are so large and lofty that none of us individually feel confident in claiming, our own contribution to kind of moving the STEM engagement dial. So for me, I can see a lot more rigorous analysis of the social networks that we're creating in a local context. And to me, I can work with our regional science hub network and say what the difference is with a lot more confidence. So before we open up for questions, I just thought now we'd hear from some of the regional science hub representatives we have with us today. And I've asked them all to tell us about the difference that this long-term engagement strategy is having in their own communities. So first up, let's hear from Doug Record, who's coming to us from the Sapphire Coast.
Hi, Jackie. Hi to everyone. And we haven't got as much moisture down here yet, but the forecast for tomorrow looks pretty threatening. Look, just very quickly, we're on the far south coast of New South Wales. It's a beautiful area, very tourism dependent economy. And I mean, obviously, summer 2019, 2020, with the bushfires, really just blew that economy to bits when everyone had to evacuate from the south coast, and major loss of infrastructure and destruction of people's houses. And then the corona, I mean, this is a story that everyone's familiar with, and the flooding that's occurring on the north coast. I mean, these are other dimensions of, perhaps evidence of increasing severity of climate-related events that are impacting on us. And in the midst of that, we've got this science hub that Jackie has helped build since about 2013. And we've got applications due today for Science Week funding, and I was working on that over the weekend. And I noted that in our 2017 application, we had 5 organisations represented on that application, and I had positive responses from, I think, 12 organisations in this round. And that's despite the fact that due to those fires and economic events, we've lost a couple of organisations, major organisations. Sapphire Coast Marine Discovery Centre, which was 10 years of volunteer work to build a community-based research and education organisation, came to an end because of a combination of events. And On the Perch Bird Park, which was a wonderful initiative with an ecologist down here, they chose to close because of the risk of fires. So we've lost organisations, but we've got this nucleus of people that are enthusiastic about science, understand the absolute importance of science to our community's future. And I can't speak highly enough of what Jackie's done. I mean, it's pretty marvellous that as a small enterprise, let's put it at that, a small under-resourced organisation, she's been able to extend that support to our network, not just in the funding that's been extended in grants, but the professional learning events, which have been really significant. Personally, events like the conference at Bundanon, those things add impetus to your life and your enthusiasm and the work that you're doing. I'm lucky enough to be a paid employee of the Department of Education, and I'm working, but I am volunteering my time in this capacity. I'm not actually paid to be a support person, a volunteer for the network, but it's important to my work for my organisation. So the structures that Environmental Inspiring Australia, New South Wales have put in place have really added value to what we're doing, because it's created an expectation over that period of time since about 2013, 2014, that we will work collaboratively, that what we can do is greatly magnified when we reach out in our local area to join forces with other organisations, and then to link with other organisations throughout the state. And today is just a classic example of that. I'm in the middle of my school planning processes, and just to hear from Jeremy and Jackie there just gave me a couple of really valuable insights which will help me with my work. And I know that when coronavirus hit and Jackie mobilised that training with physics on the online delivery for Science Week, just how crucially important that was for our hub, because we were able to deliver a science week primarily online, and if we hadn't had that training, the value and the quality of what we had to offer just wouldn't have been as good. So Jackie, and to all those at Inspiring Australia New South Wales, thank you very much for your support to help sustain what we're doing out here in the networks. And when people were talking about measuring impact and causality, and I thought of, if a tree falls in a forest, does anyone hear? Well, if you're a big enough resourced organisation, the tree might fall on the external validation team that you've put in place to measure the event. But, for a lot of us, we're so busy with the work that we're doing that, collecting the evidence does require additional resources. And some organisations have got the benefit of having teams of people that can do that. But I think if you look at the photographs and the numbers on people that have attended our community engagement events, people are having a good time. One of the things about science is that we've gone beyond the lab coats and the boring presentations. There's the diversity of events that Jackie has helped nurture that build in creativity, the creative arts, a real maverick range of things that just open people's eyes to what science can be, has been incredibly valuable. So I'll leave it at that to say that we're trying to get Science Week organised for 2021, and we've got about 12 organisations in place. We're in a little country town. Bega's population is the major centre. It's only about 9,000 people. So I just think without that external support, it is just a struggle in rural Australia to get some of these things happening. So keep up the great work, Jackie. And I just thought I'd show you on my table here. This was found under our building. That's a diamond python has shed its skin, and from time to time I can hear it up in the roof. So that
Keep
was
him warm and dry.
well, there's some fascinating science to be had with exploring the biology of our living things here, and that's our work, and the community is on board with it, and a lot of that has been due to the support from Inspiring Australia New South Wales. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug. And I have to say, these grants that we're giving out are very small. They're ranging from $5,000 to $10,000. So what you managed to achieve with that small amount is incredible. So thank you. So let's go north now to Kirsty Abbott, who's coming to us from New England. Kirsty, are you there?
I am.
Okay,
hi, everyone.
Take it away.
Thank you so much for having me today. And it's lovely to be able to talk after Doug, coming from Bega with 9,000 people and seeing the events and the initiatives that they have there. I'm in Armidale, so we have a population of around 30,000 with the sort of the broader villages outside Armidale. But we also have the benefit of University of New England. So we are embedded in a long-term education region. We're relatively conservative, agricultural focused and environment focused kind of area. And but the demographics that we're dealing with here are really, really broad. So I'm just going to go straight into, I think, the benefits and what we've been asked to talk about, the benefits of Inspiring Australia. The New England Northwest Regional Science Hub started in 2013, like Doug's hub. And like Doug, we've had people here that have been around for that 8-year period. So one of the huge benefits for us is having that long-term investment of volunteers over 8 years. And those really like long-term locals have welcomed people coming and going. In a small area, you'll agree that there's lots of turnover of residents and people with different skills. So we've been able to work and welcome people with different skills, and that's what essentially drives the initiative for that year. If somebody comes in as a physicist or an astrophysicist and has a great idea and some energy around a particular initiative, then we're able to embrace that and everybody gets on board and learns really quickly to do something different. So that's been huge for us, this stable long-term base of locals that's welcomed a sort of a shifting mosaic of expertise and skills, whether these people have come in and out of the university or just in and out of a community, but community groups we work with. The Thalgara Environmental Ed Centre, which is like where Doug is. We work with community groups like the Tree Group, Land Care, our regional art museum. So that diversity makes it really strong and resilient as well. So highlighting different expertise and skills, that's been fantastic, but also accessing their different networks. And in regional areas, because people come into our area and go again, they bring with them their networks. And so that's been fantastic for us. And that means that we can link out to people like Doug and Jane and Phoebe and, you know, people in other regional science hubs too. And as Doug mentioned, getting those people together from regional science hubs that have been there for sort of 5 to 8 years has been invaluable. And we talk to each other quite often to get ideas. And even if we're not talking, I know we're all looking at what each other are doing as well. So you sort of keep in touch that way. I also want to say that the hub model that Jackie has set up in New South Wales has allowed us to be creative and specific to our regional context, but allow us to have some, or like look at commonalities in, I guess, looking at impact and evaluation as well. So as an ecologist, for us, that actually infers a whole heap of strengths and resilience that we couldn't have if we were simply picking an off-the-shelf event or taking an event from metropolitan areas. It allows us to exactly what Jeremy and Jane said around looking at our audience. Our demographics are specific, our needs are specific, the gaps and our challenges here are really specific. And what Jackie has done is allow us to do what we need to do, which is different to Lismore and different to South Coast and different to Canowindra. So we've thrived over the last 8 years and had that continuity because it allows us to do what we need to do in our town, and that's been fantastic. I also want to point out this idea of value. We were thinking recently in our hub about micro values and how micro values can be anything from an individual's value, which drives them to attend an event or to give feedback or something like that, to a family's value and what the parents might value in terms of taking the kids to something, then their neighbourhood, I guess, and then their town and their region as well. So kind of scaffolding the values around how we engage people in science has been really interesting for us too, particularly because we have this incredibly educated community here with the university, and we're able to bring that global value, I guess, and the global perspective to our science engagement as well. And again, you know, when we talk about these things with Jackie, she's incredibly encouraging and supportive and links us out to resources that help us, I guess, just include all this in our thinking and our initiatives. So they're my main ones. A huge thank you to Jackie though as well, and also this long-term network that this hub has created. I feel like in logging onto this meeting today, I was looking at the names of people that have informed everything we've done here for the last 7 to 8 years. And I truly feel like we are part of a community that I can wave to people and say, hi, I'm a science engagement expert and we do this thing in our regional area. And one of the other huge benefits is really empowering people to feel confident in owning our science engagement. We can say, we are science engagement people, this is what we do, rather than kind of go, oh, I don't really know what we do. We kind of run a few events, we sort of, you know, and that has been huge. In these days and age where we're not butcher, baker, candlestick makers, we're a huge, complex range of careers, we can kind of have this thing. And so I'd like to say a huge thank you to Inspiring Australia for that.
Thank you, Kirsty. And for anyone who doesn't know, Kirsty has been very successful in raising a large amount of money to build a new science centre in the New England region called the Boiler House Discovery Centre. And she's raised many millions of dollars actually through philanthropic funding and through government support. So that also is a testament to your impact kind of presentation, Kirsty. I'm sure.
Oh, thank you. Well, and the help of everybody else here to watch this space.
Yeah, so congratulations, Kirsty. So hold your questions for our final guest. Jane Richards and Brian Doherty are coming to us from Dungog, where it's flooding, and they've driven their ute down from their farm at Tabble Forest, and I'm thrilled that they're joining us here today. Jane and Brian, please unmute yourselves and share your story with us about the impact Inspiring Australia has made in your region. Thanks.
Hello. Hello from Dungog. Oh, good. So yes, we have driven our ute through, not through floodwaters, but through landslips, unfortunately. Yes, we're a small hub in the foothills of the Barrington Tops. It's traditionally cattle country around here, and our area is even smaller than the other hubs. We're only about 9,000 people, with only 2,000 in our main township. So much smaller. And so, yes, we really appreciate Kirsty's comments about micro values there. We certainly understand those. I'm just going to talk a little bit about our approach to particularly the social benefits that we've been creating. So one of the things, a critical thing we do is bringing science awareness of really topical issues that are relevant to our community. We've covered, lots of science topics, but some of the ones that have been really critical have been like NBN coverage. Another reason why we're in the James Theatre today, because of the internet being a bit dodgy around here. Renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, on-farm robots and drones, biodiversity loss and ecological restoration, impacts of flying foxes, sustainability in our local shire, and those types of things. But so many more science topics. There's been 42 we've been going for 5 years, 42 events. So some of our approaches is we always invite community members to come to us with topics they want to address, or to work with us to create an event. And we collaborate with many local partners in the community, local businesses and councils. So we've really been building those networks. One thing is that consistency is really important for us. To have the funding that we can consistently, ongoing, create annual events is really important for building trust and making connections and ultimately having an impact, rather than just having a random big event once a year or something like that. It's ongoing activities that's really important. And the other thing that's really important for us is creating meaningful social interactions. We design in structured opportunities for audience to meet and mingle as part of our events. These are opportunities to discuss the science that is being presented. And it's those casual chats with the scientists and within the community that have led to quite a few other projects and events around town. In a way, our programs have acted something like an innovation incubator. And I just want to mention some events that have had real social benefits and have led to a series of community building activities. So as part of National Science Week in 2018, we screened a feature-length documentary, Blue, a powerful film on human impacts to the ocean environments. This was followed by a panel of 3 scientists and conservationists and a Q&A talking about the impacts and actions in our region. And after the lively discussion, we invited everyone behind the big screen to view displays and continue to chat and have drinks and nibbles. Several of us were chatting with some of the Newcastle speakers who mentioned they were working on a plastic-free Newcastle campaign. And that formed the impetus to start a single-use plastic-free initiative in Dungog Shire. The group from that day organised a community program letting people know how they could reduce or eliminate single-use plastics. We ran group competitions, made up banners, flyers, posters, and got editorial coverage in the media. The group then went on to start a Blue Planet status system, which provides businesses who demonstrate their reduction of single-use plastic products with certificates of merit and provided media coverage for their efforts. This was particularly ramped up during a Plastic Free July campaign that generated a lot of buzz in the regional media, with ABC Newcastle creating a video, which was then got quite a lot of radio and social media coverage. And those single-use plastic-free Dungog and Blue Planet status systems are ongoing projects that you'll see around Dungog even now. And other communities in both New South Wales and Queensland have asked to be part of the Blue Planet status. So it's got a life beyond us. So the initial group from that day has expanded, and we then went on to create another Science Hub event, partnered event, called Sustainability Spotlight on Dungog Shire in 2019. It was a Pechakucha style event. It had 18 speakers that were given 5 minutes and 10 slides each on the big cinema screen here in the James Theatre. It was fast and pacey, and the speakers were local businesses, community groups, and individuals demonstrating sustainable practice in their endeavours. This event had a large amount of community involvement. Once again, there were nibbles, drinks, and chat behind the big screen with displays and stalls. This event itself was recognised with a highly commended award in Community Spirit and Inclusion section of the 2019 Tiny Towns Awards. And some of the spin-offs of all of this larger community engagement have included things like Dungog being the first town to have coffee cup rescue upcycling sites. The council has installed quite a few water refill stations around. Soft plastics are being collected and baled at the local recycling centre, and we have a return and earn kiosk. And we also have posters of all these types of activities called Snap This that we put in the Dungog Common and all around town. And the Dungog Common is getting a lot of tourist traffic at the moment with mountain bikers. So the group that was behind this and as part of the Science Hub is continuing to meet, and we're organising more events and more projects, and we're looking at what scientists that we can bring in to talk to us and help this develop further. So that's just one of our types of events that we're seeing is, community building, ongoing activities, and that's one way we can see the life of what we do as a science hub continuing into the future.
I think the important thing in all of this really is chance. You can program as much as you like, but one of the great things about social interaction is the chance interactions. It's not as though we plan to have all of these offshoots. They happen, but they happen because what we did plan was the social interaction, and what we did develop was trust between people. So sometimes, I think it's good to have designed in those broader process ideas rather than a physical outcome. I mean, yeah, we didn't plan any of those things. They happened, but they happened because we created this social interaction, the trust. We had that long-term continuity in our programming, which built those things. And ultimately, something as difficult to quantify as resilience in the community is what comes out of that chaos.
Yeah, and I just think that the hubs are just so, and being able to bring science and to our community is just so valuable, particularly in smaller regional communities. With the world changing so quickly, with climate change, pandemics, and all sorts of things, it's just helping us navigate through. And I will also just like to pick up on Doug's comment that it's just been so valuable being part of the overall Science Hub network and all those professional learning programs that you've been creating has just been really valuable for us and us ongoing. Yeah, so that's us.
Thank you so much, Jane and Brian. Just fantastic. And the three kind of things that really resonate for all of you in the regions are the ripple effects of meeting, the social gathering and entertainment recreational opportunities that you're creating for your town. They're fun. People get together and it's part of the social fabric of the town. And also the way a lot of our tiny grants go to creating legacy content, whether it be the boomerang bags or a video. And when we have things picked up by the ABC, often there's hundreds and thousands of views and, you know, beautiful videos that can continue to be watched and enjoyed. So thank you to you both and to all our Science Hub guests for your work. And I'll now throw back to Jazz, who's going to open it up for questions. Jazz.
Thank you, everyone. That was absolutely excellent. Really appreciate all of the speakers. If you can all do a virtual clap out there. Show your hands, show your appreciation. Great. Look, I think all that resonates brilliantly. The stories, the incidental activities that occur as described by Jane so well, I think, and agglomeration apparently is what economists call that, the benefit of agglomeration. Thanks, Jeremy. Those are things that we'll all be witnessing in our activities. So and that is very hard to measure, as Jackie just put in the chat. One of the questions that's come through, it's one for you, Jeremy. From the outset, you've heard about the sort of size of our hubs. Can you give us any thoughts around how you plan for measuring outcomes and long-term impacts without having dedicated resources to do that? Are there any tips and that you could provide to us there?
I think there's a couple, but I think and a few mentioned already as well. One of the resources that's mentioned in the chat, the link to the National Science Week, I think it's evaluation. It's remarkably low cost to go gather your own information, and Jackie's talked about how she, puts a bit of an obligation on people to make sure they survey people. Collecting information is remarkably low cost in this current environment, but it does take you then to have some assumptions. But the other way to think about some of this is what we call a break-even analysis. So it presupposes we know what the costs of doing this are. If we only got one, and then insert what type of benefit, if we only got one more scientist who did something amazing, if we only got one more job created in our region because of that benefit of agglomeration, people coming together thinking, if we only saved extra, this would pay for itself if we reduced waste through coffee cups, if we only saved 1,000 coffee cups or whatever the metric is. So sometimes we know the costs really well. We don't know the benefits as well, but there's a common sense kind of test that people can normally apply that says we will pay for this if we only achieve some certain outcome. And so sometimes that's an easy way to reframe it into benefits without actually knowing the scale or scope of the benefits.
Nice, thank you. That does lead me to another question that came through for Jackie around how you estimated the healthcare cost that was avoided. I think that's one of the things that we look at. How do you actually look into that, Jackie?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So there are you can reference studies that show the cost of avoided healthcare, negative healthcare outcomes. So there are external studies that are available to enable you to do that. So in order to look at that, you look at the population that that you had in that area. You're going to make some assumptions about the health issues that they might have, and there would be an element. There's an element there underlying the study. The study, there was quite a lot of stakeholder engagement, so that that's questioning, what happened, it might include some questions about underlying health status and, how you're doing now. And then so you can make some assumptions there about the information that's been received via the neighbourhood house. That enabled me to make some better health choices, for example. And that's, so you, as you said, you link it back. There are some assumptions there. You're going to have to make some educated guesses about the proportion of change that can be attributed to engagement with the neighbourhood house in this case, and then start to make that assessment by that method.
Thank you, Jackie. That's great. Please put any other questions that you've got into the chat over here. I've got another one around, are there any inexpensive technologies available that track customer impact over time? And I'll open that up to any of our speakers if they've come across inexpensive technologies that we could deploy.
I don't know of anything as in the generic technology response. I think it is very much looking at particular changes in particular usage patterns rather than a technology we just roll out. So this is where we are reliant on data. One thing that's good about COVID, and maybe the only thing that's good about COVID, is it forced people to think in data, in real-time data, rather than waiting 3 or 6 months for the ABS to pump something out. There's a much greater source of data from banks and so forth about what people are spending money on, and has revealed patterns of what they're doing. So there's not a single technology, but if you look at the digital payments, I think often gives you directions of what people are spending money on. And Commonwealth Bank gives it away. There's a number of other organisations. So think laterally, I think, is the answer here.
Excellent, thank you. Another one that I've just received is around the benefit of long surveys. So we do have surveys and we ask for people to do surveys versus a little micro survey that everyone tries to get out there, 3 questions, for example. And we have debated this in the Inspiring Australia Executive Committee. Is the big long survey trying to collect demographic data, but hard to get people to stand there for 5 minutes to do it with you, versus the quick 3 questions? I'd really welcome any thoughts on that.
I think it's a combination. I think there are combinations that work well. And what are you trying to get at is the key issue here. I think the quick punchy thing is very much good about attitudinal responses, or just things that you don't need to think about. Now, longer surveys, obviously, if they're too long, you get errors, you get non-completions, and you have a whole range of those problems. But in some ways, you just can't get around that when you're asking for detailed information. So it's better to have a smaller number of high quality in that context. And it probably means thinking about whether it is online or not online. Those longer ones I find are more effective when you're actually doing them in person and someone's almost there prompting. It's harder to exit the survey when it drags on a little bit. So I feel sorry for the people filling it out, but they're horses for courses again, I think here.
Just to jump in there, I totally agree. And one of the things you might want to think about is, the short survey for people who are just at the point of engagement with the program, whereas a longer face-to-face approach with people who are already engaged, perhaps, several months post event, to follow up and get a bit more qualitative data about, that experience and how that's influenced what they've then done.
Excellent. I do want to perhaps put Rob Fuller on notice that I might come out to him as he manages Inspiring Australia. So Rob, get ready. But in the meantime, I just for any comments here. But I do have another one around exactly that point, Jackie. around how you get funding agencies to look at qualitative rather than this forensic focus on short-term quantitative measures. How do you, I mean, what we've talked about today has been stories, and the stories matter, as Jeremy indicated in his presentation, and you and yours. Be really keen to understand your thoughts on how that becomes valuable, but we recognise that we need to do this quantitative piece as well.
Yeah, no, it's always challenging. And I guess one of the things I'd say is to start off and perhaps try and look at how you might, what the change has been, and then how you might link that change to something that is actually of interest to the policymakers and the people who are who ultimately are your audience for that evaluation. So that if engagement in STEM is really important to policymakers, then think about what stories might you be able to tell them to hook them in, and then think about the kind of data that you could collect. You may be able to, for example, say do follow-up surveys with students in local areas, and we routinely will do interviews that will then classify the information, so you'll so that you can understand what are the key issues that each person was interested in, how many people were interested in. It was said that have expressed some views about wanting to go on to learn more about science and technology. So there are definitely ways that you can translate qualitative data into some quantitative numbers about issues of importance, for example, is a classic one.
Very helpful. So choose the right stories, look for those outcomes, and even the long-term sustainability as well.
Yeah.
That's great, Jackie. Thank you. Anything from you, Jeremy, on that one, or other speakers?
Okay. I think that was a nice summary.
Good answer. Excellent. Good. Are there any other questions out there? I'm going to ask Rob, who I think is still online. If you've got any thoughts, Rob, that you'd like to share with the group around how Inspiring Australia has done its measuring of impact, and it'd just be good to hear from you in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Can everyone hear me? I'm using a headphone that I'm not used to here. So look, fantastic story is there, and actually really important in the shift of the narrative from number of graduates being the outcome of any engagement to being attitudes and behaviours. And also, I think we've got a little bit of a job to do in front of us about telling those stories about the value of connections. That story from Dungog about the single-use plastics campaign, where you guys hooked up with Newcastle, heard what they're doing, and then there you go, there's a community that are actually doing and making change in their community. I think is absolutely fantastic. And when we talk about the value to, say, policymakers, and you're talking about moving that narrative from, say, jobs potentially, or science graduates, to actual community-based impacts, that stuff's incredibly powerful. From a federal perspective, how do we evaluate what's going on? It's pretty mechanical. The IA managers, write tomes in their reporting about what each of those hubs are doing and about the impacts. Impacts probably lighter on than numbers of people attending events and so on. And that's drawn together from all states and territories by an evaluation team in the Department of Industry at various points. I'd make the point that the activities of the network are just other things like the Prime Minister's Prizes for Science, Science Week federally, Maker Grants, and a few other things. And so that evaluation, when that comes up to those stages throughout the program life, are all drawn together, and an assessment is made about the impact overall. And that goes back to sort of, is the policy achieving what it was setting out to do? And those policy objectives are pretty broad. Engagement with science, how do you define that? And those kinds of things. So all of that information is there's a lot of it, It comes from the reports, and it comes from the numbers, and it comes from the stories that are provided by those IA managers and drawn together to check from a federal perspective if the government's priority and goals through that program are being met. I hope that answers the
Fantastic.
question.
Thanks, Rob. Sorry. No, that's absolutely terrific. Thank you for that background. If there's no further questions, I'm not seeing any more in the chat. We will draw to a close. We are very keen to hear from you, though. Please do email Jackie or myself with any other thoughts on this. It's been an absolutely excellent session. Can you please join me again in clapping for our speakers and for them giving their time this morning for an hour and a half. We really appreciate that. A reminder that our grants for the major Science Week event grant closes on the 21st of April. So that's the $25,000 event grant. If anyone's got any great ideas there, then please let us know. We will get copies of the presentations that we'll send around to everyone, and we'll make those available. But otherwise, I'd like to thank Jackie for pulling together a fantastic session as usual, and it's just been a pleasure to see you all this morning. Thank you so much. Have good days. Stay dry.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.